100 days as a nuclear engineer in a Fallout bunker vault. Again, this is my first ever 200 days video because I just couldn't stop playing in this base. Seriously, this is how much fun the first 100 day video was. And how much you guys blew me up in the comments with all the love. Thank you, by the way, I don't deserve you. And I just couldn't resist making this 200 day video. Now, as you already know, the city above us was hit by a nuclear bomb. And because of that, we cannot ever return to the surface. And even though we're underground, the system of mine shafts, caves, and sewers have been filled with radioactive particles. We're going to have to hurry to get our molten salt reactor cooled, fueled, and working. We have to try and turn this small survival bunker into an industrial powerhouse to help us rebuild the city. And we actually have to finish the bunker, with my last goal being to heal the radiation and to start the regrowth project, which on day 72, you'll have to see that beauty. But on day 101, I don't have any time to plan for that. As I wake up, I see that the radiation is still staggering, even with all my heavy shielding armor from the first 100 days. I walk around the base, trying to remember everything that I've built. I haven't played on this map in like a full month IRL. Plus, I do have doo-doo memory, so it's probably a good idea to take a quick tour. And at least part of this base is pretty legit. I head back into the heart of the bunker, and I see that the lab is still trying to pump out all of the parts for our molten salt reactor. I then head down into the sub-level with our reactors, and no, I will not be calling this the sub-dungeon. The trusted fission reactor here on our left, and then our pride and joy, the molten salt reactor in the back. I have some mixed emotions going on here. While I love what this bunker is looking like so far, I'm really nervous about the 15 millirads and only having 5 radaway. Look, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I only planned to be in this bunker for 100 days, so I did not stockpile enough radaway. So now that we're down here and we only have 5, we better start getting some sugarcane processed right away. Radaway in a nuclear apocalypse is a lot like toilet paper in a pandemic. You don't really think about it till you need it and you run out. So just like in the real world, we should probably panic buy and overstock ourselves. And while this should be our primary concern, I let that process for a bit and I start to look over all of our machines. We have nuclear fuel melting down in the melter here, along with some molten lithium and beryllium in these 2 chemical reactors, which will combine with fluorine to make our fuel salts for our MSR. I think this is all correct. Honestly, I kind of forget. What I do remember is that I should really be trying to use more infinite water sources in our labs. Just like I did in the Mars video, I start to place this Nuclearcraft machine that makes infinite water forever, which it's called an infinite water source, and it's pretty self-explanatory. This will help our electrolyzer make hydrogen. But before we get into all that, let's do a little procrastination, like I do in real life, and repair our drill. For those who didn't see the first 100 days, the drill is a tool that helps us mine much, much faster. We're going to need to hurry up and do some drilling right away. Unfortunately, I do have to spend another radaway, so we only have 3. Because of that, I can't spend too much time getting comfy down here. I need to get right back to work. That starts with dumping all of my ores into this chest above the manufactory where they can be doubled. Then I go to turn on my nuclear reactor. Ah yes, I remember you spicy boy. This 3x6x3 reactor is pretty beastly, but it still does make a little bit of heat, which you can see in that second bar slowly climbing up. Even though we're only burning MOX fuel, we still can't just leave this thing running. So, like a clingy boyfriend, I have to spend the entire day giving her all of my attention. I use some of the lithium that we mined from day 1 so that we can make tough alloy, the central material for all Nuclearcraft builds. But the loyal viewers already know that. We can use the tough alloy to make a chemical reactor, but I'm quickly reminded that we need to pay attention. I have to use another radaway. I can't get too distracted with all these shiny nuclear toys because I only have 2 radaway left. I make a melter. I then pull out all the drawers in my kitchen, trying to find any leftover sugar that I can. I haven't had any luck finding a sugar daddy in the first 100 days, so I'm still going to have to make my own. I try to add all that sugar into the melter, and I make the first mistake of the playthrough. Yeah, only took 1 day. I try to run some fluid pipes from the melter, and I get it mixed up with the infinite water source, and it floods with water. I have to break them, and then drain the water out of all my tanks. Then, I try a little trick, where I get the molten sugar into this pipe using a servo. By doing this, the water and the sugar don't mix. But if they did, I guess we would get some kind of soda. Hey, maybe if we add a little uranium, we can make Mountain Dew. but I already have radiation poisoning, and I don't need to add kidney stones to that. So now we have our ethanol, which is only slightly worse than Mountain Dew, and we can add that to our enricher with some glowing mushrooms, which, thank Mojang, we do have some of those. I then finish everything with some bioplastic. But we still don't even have enough to make one radaway. I can't really run around and start making a bunch of molten salt reactor fun stuff with only 2 radaway. And finally, we get one radaway. So yeah, we're gonna need to work on getting more of this. In the meantime, I start to set up some power cords because we're gonna have to get this area ready to hold a bunch more machines. I'm gonna make a system of machines that I learned about when I was on Mars, which includes the igneous extractor, which turns water and lava into whatever rocks we want. Then, I quickly make a magma crucible, which can make lava out of cobblestone. And then finally, I top all this off by making a Nuclearcraft machine, a cobblestone generator. And now we can make infinite cobblestone, turn it into lava, then turn that lava with some water into whatever kind of rocks we want, without even mining them. Now, I hear you saying, Captain, you're so smart and so cool. And I know, loyal viewer, I know. We're so smart, we even go behind the lab and hook up our fluid pipes into the butt of the extruder, so we can have infinite water combining with our lava to make all of our rocks. So, I think our first stone will be diorite. We just need to configure the machines so that it will move the lava to the right, and boom, we're pumping out free diorite. Pretty impressive. And little did I know, for my next big trick, I was going to be trying to make this base disappear, because I start to make a nuclear fuel that will almost definitely blow us into vapor. Neptunium-based fuels, like this HEN-236, are super hot-burning fuels, so this reactor might start to get really spicy. But the thing is, I need to burn HEN, because it's going to help with a future project, so here we go. Okay, let's grab just one pellet at first, and then... Woo! Okay, yep. Chill out there, heat bar. And speaking of too much radiation, it's time to address the elephant's foot in the irradiated room and deal with our radaway production. Now, like a good little survivor, I've had plenty of glowstone dust and mushrooms stocked away to make glowing mushrooms. I drop them into the enricher because I want to put this radiation fear to rest. I then start to make a ton of mushrooms down below the bunker by bone mealing a little mushroom to make it grow. Boning a little mushroom to make it grow? No. Don't do it, Captain. To make MSR fuels, we need a lot of fluorine, which we mix with both molten lithium and beryllium. And this process is painful. But it's not as painful as all of my skin falling off due to the radiation poisoning, so it's a good thing that we have some radaway finally coming in. Speaking of living a nuclear nightmare, the HEN fuel is still super unstable, and it is not fun to use. I decided to only put in one pellet at a time to keep it a little bit safer, and never let the heat go over halfway full. Who am I kidding with all these safety protocols? We both know I'm going to blow this thing up again. Day 6, I head to the nether, and this happens. Okay, I try to put a little fire out in front of me, and I actually hit a pigment. Now, they're all attacking me. Plus, I'm still burning, and I get all the way down to half a heart. Then it hits me. If I die right here, it won't take me back 6 days. It'll take me back 106 days. I've never done a 200 days playthrough, and fighting this little thing, I'm telling you right now, rewatching this footage, I can't tell you how tight my butt cheeks were clenched right here. Like, this had me screaming with fear, and it's just a little pigman kid. I have to totally rethink this whole playthrough, and I have to be so much more careful from now on. This seems like the perfect time to make my little announcement. I'm holding a contest to see who gets to play with me in my next video, thanks to our sponsor, Rec Room. Rec Room is a free-to-play, community-driven social app. It's a game that you can play in VR or on PC, console, mobile, even iOS now. I think you can even play it on your Samsung smart fridge if you try really hard. You can click the link down in my description and add me as a friend. I'm TheCaptainsTV, obviously. Look, I've even got a little captain's hat. You can invite your own friends to play with you in your own private dorm room. And there's always tons of fun new worlds being built all the time, like this Backrooms game that we played. Or you could just do what I always do and play a little paintball. Claire, use Jeremy as a body shield. Did we just get wiped?
Yeah, like one dude.
Yeah, I didn't say I was any good. Yes, go, 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 yes!
Red flag dropped. Red flag taken. Blue team scores.
Woo! By clicking the link, you'll be supporting me in a huge way, and I cannot thank you enough for doing it. Remember, it's free, and it's playable on every device. But also, if you want to be featured in my next video, you can join Rec Room, build your own room, and then send me the name in my Discord in the Rec Room tab, and if I like it, I'll play it with you on my next video. In Rec Room, you can build whatever you want. But I mean, obviously, you should make it Minecraft themed, because duh. Also, I like PvP and parkour, but you know, who doesn't? So, come play Rec Room with me, and maybe you could be in my next 100 days video. Oh, speaking of video, it's probably a good time to get back to trying not to die in my Minecraft video again. So, of course, I probably shouldn't be this high up in the air, but I do really need this glowstone, because the radiation isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and I really need these glowing mushrooms ASAP. Now, with all these glowing mushrooms and ethanol, we might actually have a smart amount of RADaway. That'd be the first smart thing I've done. And speaking of smart, we smartly expand the sugarcane farm. But I think I really want to expand this big boy right here. I start to craft up some money coolers, which need to be touching a reactor cell and a moderator block. Now, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, don't worry, I don't know what I'm talking about either. All you need to know is that we're going to open up the bottom of this nuclear reactor and install more parts to hopefully cool it down a little bit. I place a reactor cell in the dead center, and then I surround it with the coolers so that they're all touching a cell. Then, we just need to place our graphite moderator blocks in all the corners under the original cells. This will make a little more power, but a lot more cooling for those big nasty Neptunium fuels. At least I hope. Next, I'm going to try out a new little trick that I've been working on. I have a new design that I'm trying to add on to every 3x3 reactor by adding a cooler cap on the bottom. This starts out with the central redstone cooler, which is touching a cell, which we then surround in water coolers that touch the moderator blocks. Finally, we add some gold. And we've run out of gold. Good thing I'm a gold digger. And after flirting with some of my Twitch simps, I make our last gold cooler and I put it in place. This means that the bottom of the reactor is all about adding some extra cooling without any heat increase. So I really love this upgrade in my design. However, after all of that being said and done, we close up the reactor and we get everything to run again, and the heat is still over 16K, so this HEN fuel, it's just too spicy. After spending a day trying not to blow myself up, I'm pretty sure we need to really focus on getting our safer reactor working. The molten salt reactor can make a ton of power, and it only needs the super safe TBU fuel. So I start to melt a whole bunch of that up, and I even grab another chemical reactor. With this, we'll be mixing our melted TBU with fluorine. Yeah, even more fluorine. But that's what it takes to make TBU fluorine fuel. Now, all we need to do is add Flybe salt mixture, which is made out of that molten lithium and beryllium. We take all of this and mix it together in a salt mixer machine. So I craft that up and I add it to the lab. But now, how do we make so much fluorine? It's time to craft up another melter so that we can melt up sulfur. Yeah, you guys know where I'm going with this. I'm going to rush through this because I've done this like 3 videos in a row, and at this point it's actually not that important. I find a better way to do this anyway. A melter connected to the first chemical reactor will help us make sulfur dioxide. And yes, now that I say it out loud, mixing sulfur with oxygen does kind of sound like we're cooking up farts, but either way, we aren't going to be wasting any time smelling this stuff. Speaking of feeling sick to our stomachs, on a more serious note, the intense radiation has us redlining our rad meter. We need to keep an eye on that and make sure that we're always using our RADaway. Okay, and after getting some relief from that tense moment, we can get right back to making our farts. A second chemical reactor will add even more oxygen and let us make sulfur trioxide. And now we just need to add some water in, yes, another chemical reactor. Yeah, I know, it's annoying. But finally, we do get the end product, which is hydrofluoric acid. But I'm going to leave that alone for just a minute. Because now it's time to get to work on our eutectic NAC, aka the coolant for our molten salt reactor. To make NAC, it takes molten sodium and potassium, which luckily are made in very similar ways. They just have to start from different materials, and this is where our rock production process comes in. We can make granite using our new rock making system, crush it in the rock crusher, make willemite, put that into the manufactory, and yes, if your brain is hurting, imagine how mine feels. But one thing that takes no brain power whatsoever is RTGs. These things are the whole reason that we were messing around with that NEH fuel anyway. From those, we got the plutonium to make the RTGs. Now we just need a little bit of redstone, which means we need a little bit of mining. We find some redstone, thorium, and uranium. An engineer's dream come true. And speaking of an engineer's dream come true, we finally get our hydrofluoric acid. Yeah. And while I wouldn't put this stuff on your Christmas list, it's exactly what we need to make more fluorine. Speaking of things that I'm happy to see, but probably shouldn't have, we have a ton of plutonium-238 from all of that HEN fuel. Now, with the redstone, we can make our plutonium RTGs. If you did see my 100 Days on Mars video, you already know why this is so amazing. But for those who didn't, I can now use this block to make a constant 100 RF with no fuel or fallout. It makes Captain very happy. Almost as happy as all of you. And speaking of all of you, thank you for all of the subs and all of the support recently. We're already at like 80K, and we might actually get to 100K subs on YouTube. That is insane. I mean, I think that means I might actually get one of those cool YouTube plaques. And I was a little too distracted there. I kind of almost just melted the core down. Okay, maybe I should spend a little less time dreaming about all you beautiful subs and a little more time focused on this nuclear reactor. Another nuclear reactor just got a little bit closer to coming online because we finally produced a little bit of molten flab salt solution of TBU fluoride fuel, which is a really long way of saying molten salt reactor fuel. So, as day 11 starts, we don't need to focus so much on making fuel, but instead, we need to focus on making that NAC coolant. So it's a good thing we have some sodium fluoride. The whole lot of fluorides and fluorines. Anyway, we need to process this into molten sodium. In addition to molten sodium, we need to make potassium, which we can get by putting carbonite into the manufactory. Personally, I would have just had a banana, but whatever. Oh, come on. You knew the second you heard potassium, I was going to make some kind of banana joke. If you didn't see that cringe coming, that's on you. We then get another fluid enricher, and I decide to add in the potassium fluoride first. Unfortunately, it looks like we don't have enough power for all of these extra machines. Okay, let's add a fluid infuser down here by the reactor. This way, we can start to make some oxide fuels. We put the plutonium and the oxygen into the fluid infuser, neither of which are fluids, but hey, I'm a dude trying to use bananas to cool down a nuclear reactor, so what do I know? With this plutonium oxide, we can continue to make fuels that I actually like to use, like MOX. I then decide to break down our hydrofluoric acid system. I recycle one of the chemical reactors so that we can mix water with the potassium fluoride solution coming out of the first enricher. And after a full day of processing, as a byproduct, we get hydrofluoric acid. See? It's much quicker, and it doesn't need all that sulfur. I'm actually getting pretty good at this whole science stuff. But I guess I'm not really as good as I think, because even after all that infinite water source talk, I'm still loading these machines with water by hand. After making a crystallizer, I place it next in line. And now, it's time to get these two machines automated. But I do quickly get sidetracked from that, and I start to move all of this hydrofluoric acid over to the other side of the lab. Hey, this stuff was a huge pain in my butt before, so can you blame me for getting a little excited here? With all of this fluorine from the hydrofluoric acid, we now have a pretty good amount of MSR fuel coming along. Now we can get back to moving this melter into the NAC line. Now I know it kinda does seem a little dumb that I just used the crystallizer to make the solution into a solid, only to immediately melt it right back down, but hey, sometimes it do be like that. And while that might seem dumb, it's not nearly as dumb as me. because I try to connect the machines using a fluid pipe when the crystallized powder is clearly a solid now. So I have to make an item duct, which is a lot like a fluid pipe, except for solid items, duh. These things are going to be super important in like 50 days. I actually try to see it move through the pipe right there at the very tail end. I kind of missed that. But at least when I check the melter, I can see that it is working. Next, we can get an electrolyzer and we can add that onto the melter. This should be the last stage in the potassium process, although we still need to get a salt mixer so that we can mix in the sodium. But I'm not too worried about that salt mixer just yet. What I am worried about is trying to run 3 electrolyzers all at once, and it looks like my reactor is worried about it too. And no, clearly the reactor isn't worried. It's inanimate. I'm anthropomorphizing a little bit here, but you guys know what I'm doing, right? It's going to take a lot of power and really push our reactor. So we can help it out by throwing in some energy upgrades, and soon, with a little bit more reactor babysitting, we get our first little bit of molten potassium. All right, like I said, we are going to have to add that salt mixture. And what better place to put it than right next to the electrolyzer? Now at this point, you guys are obviously thinking, man, Captain's so smart and good looking, but where's the molten sodium going to come from? First of all, stop it, you guys. And second, the sodium doesn't need a whole row of machines to make it. It's much easier than that, but you'll see. Right now, I'm actually more excited about how the MOX fuel is so cool running that with this new reactor design, it only makes about 500 heat. It's so cool running that I could basically turn it on and walk away for a few minutes. I mean, I could walk away. I'm way too scared to actually do it. Now, I'm trying to upgrade the production line, because the sooner we have this knack being made, the sooner we can finally run our MSR. And about halfway through day 14, I see that we have a pretty good amount of potassium coming down the line. And it's time to change our focus into getting that molten sodium. We start this by changing up our rock production so that we're crushing granite. This will give us the willemite, which we can put into the manufactory. Sadly, unlike my favorite baking shows, I don't have an already cooked sample off to the side to show you guys. I'm actually going to have to spend some time processing this. You win again, Martha Stewart. But it turns out we're winning too, because with all of our extra fluorine, we now have some real salt mixture, which we can add to the TBU. And now we have a solid 3.5 buckets full of TBU fluoride fuel, ready to go. But man, is this stuff expensive. So everything hinges on it being really, really efficient and lasting a long time. On day 15, we have to do a little bit of babysitting and manually work on producing the potassium. But I don't like to be a babysitter. I much prefer to be the baby. So I'm going to set up an infinite water source here and connect it to the first 2 machines so that I don't have to load them all by hand. Does any of this make any sense? Well, it turns out it's all working, because now we have a ton of molten potassium, enough to fill up the mixer, and I actually need a tank for all the overflow. And now that that's all taken care of, we're going to have a little extra time to kill, so let's go head out and do some mining, which we do for an entire day. By the way, here's a weird YouTube meta question. Do you guys think that other YouTubers stay up all night when they do their 100 day challenges? I feel like I get way more done than most YouTubers, and I know it's not because I'm good at this game. What I am good at is finding mine shafts, lapis, coal, and redstone. Speaking of getting a lot done in one day. Day 17, and we're back at our base. Getting the last of the potassium moved through the production line. We need to clear it all out so that we can get started on the next step. Then, we melt up a whole stack of lithium. But I can afford to do this with all the mining we've gotten done. We're going to need all of this, because we have to make some more salt mixture by melting it down and adding the fluoride. You guys already know all of this. You don't need me to explain every little thing. Let's be honest, at this point, you guys just like hearing my voice. Now that the potassium has run all the way through the production line, we can add the sodium fluoride, and yes, it goes in the exact same enricher as the potassium. And this is a lifesaver, honestly, because if you want to go cheap, and I always go cheap, we can use the exact same machines in the production line to make molten sodium with no add-ons needed. Now, we keep on melting down more lithium, but I don't want to use too much of this stuff because I have a much better use for it. That's right. Elon Musk has entered the building because it's time to start making some lithium-ion batteries. Luckily, we spent so much time making the materials for elite panels in our first 100 days that we can easily get those done, and that's kind of the hardest part. Next, we just need to make some ion cells, which does take a bunch of lithium. The hard carbon and ferroboron are pretty easy. It just takes a little bit of work to get the lithium manganese dioxide outlet. First, we just need to run this rhodochrosite through the furnace to get manganese dioxide. Then, we can run it through the same fluid enricher that we're using to make our nuclear fuels. Sounds safe. Then, we can combine some lithium with the manganese dioxide, and boom, we have our ion cells good to go. We just need to do this 3 more times, but hey, I'm not going to cry about it. After all, we have a ton of way sadder things to cry about later in this video. We have our first battery. I don't know if you can tell, I am super excited. Look at me go. That's all because the battery can act like a transmission for our power supply. Now, while we do have power stored in the nuclear reactor itself, there can be more power stored in this battery, so we'll have a ton of RF backed up to run our lab. So now you've got to be thinking, what's better than a battery? Well, if I've learned anything from playing with toys that needed AA's, you're probably going to need 2 batteries. Now, it is going to take some time to charge these up, but once they have a good amount of power, our lab should almost never run out of RF. Plus, these batteries will really start to shine once we get our MSR running. Hey, speaking of which, it's been 118 days. Are we any closer to getting ready to start this thing up? Well, the last bit of potassium has made its way all the way through the process. And there's a little more progress over on the left side of the lab because we have a decent amount of TBU fuel all backed up. Still though, in the meantime, we are going to have to get a little more power out of our fission reactor. So I decided to get a bit more cooling and replace these old tin coolers from the first 30 days with some more efficient glowstone coolers. And no, I'm not pretending like this is some kind of landmark achievement or anything, but this does mean that we might be able to bring the heat level down so that the MOX fuels will run cool enough so that we could charge these batteries for a few minutes straight and not need to sit around and babysit the reactor as much. Also, less heat means it's less likely to melt down. Do I really have to explain that part? Sure enough, we can get down to 144 heat. With a reactor this size, that means the heat bar is likely barely going to move. We can really run up and store some RF now. Better yet, with our lab running at full power all the time now, we're really starting to get some molten sodium produced. We can then add that to the salt mixer where the potassium has been ever so patiently waiting, just as long as the captain waits for his ex-girlfriend. Oh God, do I miss you, Sarah. Finally, by day 20, we are keeping an eye on our reactor, but it is cool, and, more importantly, we have our first eutectic knack. Looks so yummy. Must taste forbidden Skittle juice. No. I don't think that would go well. What would go well is mixing this eutectic knack with some redstone. I know. Another thing that we have to add to the production line, but this is just made out of melting redstone, and it really increases the cooling power of the knack, so it's worth it. However, the TBU does not look like candy. Looks like something you might scrub out of the bottom of a toilet bowl, actually. But before we can flush this into our MSR, we have to do one more thing. We do have our knack and our fuel, so the MSR is technically ready to start. But we have a little more work to do. Luckily, this is the fun part. Now I know I already have a heat exchanger and a turbine, but the Nuclearcraft turbines are kind of weak unless you have a second heat exchanger and a second turbine. So I have a new plan. Now I have to give credit where it's due, and I have to thank Seb for this idea. He's a great 100 Days YouTuber who makes some really amazing tech-based videos, just like me. And he figured out that you can use 2 heat exchangers to make steam at a much higher efficiency than just the single heat exchanger alone. And that's good news. But all this obsidian is bad news, because it's right in the area where I want to build the second heat exchanger. I start to grab my heat exchanger frames and lay out the idea of what I want. The first heat exchanger produces high pressure steam, which will come into this heat exchanger instead of the turbine. This will depressurize it and make normal steam. If this is all too complicated, all you really have to understand is by using 2 heat exchangers, we can get a ton more power from the same amount of TBU fuel in the molten salt reactor. So this is really worth it. Also, this heat exchanger can be much smaller since we only need 2 rows of heat exchanger blocks. So in reality, this one is more like a baby heat exchanger. Yes, you are. Yes, you Anyway, we set up the first row of heat exchanger blocks, which will be carrying the high pressure steam so it can be depressurized and turned into normal steam. We then set up the second row of heat exchanger blocks right next to it, which will be holding the water to cool down and depressurize the high pressure steam. Now here is where the real trick of this setup comes into play. The water moving through the second tube of heat exchanger blocks will be heated up and turned into high pressure steam itself. Of course, some of the heat will be lost, and we will need to keep running the MSR to keep energy moving into the system. But by recycling the energy in the second heat exchanger, we will greatly increase the power that we're getting out of our MSR. We get the whole thing sealed up, and then we have to do a little bit of fluid pipe trickery. We have this side, which is connected back on itself like this. This way, the high pressure steam that is created inside the second heat exchanger can be added back into the system along with the high pressure steam coming from the first heat exchanger. Finally, on the output side, we have two pipes that are disconnected. The left pipe needs to hold water, which we can easily get from an infinite water source, and the right pipe will be pulling all of the depressurized steam that we'll be using to spin the turbine. So we have two heat exchangers and a turbine. We're good to go, right? Right? Captain, please no more, I hear you all cry. Well, if we turn high pressure steam into normal steam, it won't work in that nuclear turbine. It will work, however, in an immersive engineering steam turbine. Yeah, that's right. Turns out my thumbnails aren't clickbait after all, and we 100% are going to be making this beast. Or at least we would be making it if it didn't cost like $1 billion steel. And since the second heat exchanger was a huge steel sink, get it, like a heat sink? Never mind. Point is, we're going to have to go back to mining. Or at least we would if we had enough steel left over to repair our steel drill head. So yeah, we are now mining until we break our drill, which is not super ideal. So while I'm mining coal and iron, it's right about this moment where I promise myself I will never run out of steel again. And, well, I might have had a minor mental breakdown, because I definitely took this idea way too far by the end of the video, but my mental health can wait, because now I have something more important. Finally have our steel, and a lot of it. We can repair our drill and make 9 blocks of steel. Wow. And even make the other steel components for this massive, immersive engineering marvel. And when I say massive, I mean it. As it stands, there isn't even a space in the bunker big enough that can fit this thing. And no, I'm not drilling through more obsidian. So I head out to this huge open chamber filled with lava that had been ripped open from an earthquake in the first video. And so I start to make a huge floating platform out of stone. And then I think I'm ready to finally dive in. And I start to place my very first block. The steam turbine is one of the most complex machines in immersive engineering, but it's well worth it. With this machine, we will completely change how we use power. We're no longer going to have to worry about if we have enough power, because this machine has a non-stop production of 20k RF per tick. Yes, that is next level. And from this point on, we just need to consider how are we going to manage so much power? How do we store it? How do we move so much RF? What in the world can we actually use it all for? Did this whole setup take 125 days to build and fuel? Yes. Will we need to continue to maintain it and fuel it? Also yes. Is it worth it? 20k power? Yes. Definitely yes. But for such an amazing achievement, immersive engineering does have us doing just one last little thing. Yes, I know this is like the 100th time I've teased you about this MSR being finally ready, only to throw in another thing we have to build or make. But I promise, this time we're really almost there. See, the steam turbine also needs a companion machine, the alternator. This little machine isn't quite as steel hungry, but it does need high voltage components, which might make this a little bit tricky. See, even though we can make all of our steel components, we're still going to need aluminum to make high voltage coils and capacitors. And, of course, we have no aluminum. Oh, I'm sorry about that. For my UK viewers, you might not understand me because of my accent, so I'll try to pronounce it correctly from now on. So, after officially searching everywhere in my base for the aluminium, I come to the conclusion that I'm going to have to go mining once again. So the ore we're looking for is actually called bauxite, which can be smelted into the aluminium, but I'm having a really hard time finding any. And honestly, at this point, I'm thinking that there might be something wrong with my world gen. All of these mods might have messed something up because normally this ore isn't this rare to find. But finally, on day 27, we find our bauxite, and we're going to have it, which means that soon we'll have our on Tuesday, isn't it? Pretty soon, I'm actually finding it really fast. I just had to get further away from the original world gen area at spawn. However, because of this, I had to go so far away that I actually kind of get lost here. Also, I was a little bit distracted by just how hard I was laughing at my own British accent. So yeah, I gotta say, I did get a little bit lost, and I spent about a whole day just trying to get my way back to base. But finally, I do find my way back, and I start to process all our ores. Sure enough, I check our bottom chest, and we start to have some pulverized... Okay, I'm done. That was the last one. So we craft up our high voltage components, and now we can make the alternator. On day 29, we can finally make the last part of the most complex, massive multi-block machine that I've ever made ever playing Minecraft. With a total count of 5 multi-block machines and well over 40 of these single-block machines, we finally are going to have a full molten salt reactor steam turbine setup. And yes, I know, this is just a game about blocks, but this has taken so much work and planning and time and calculation. This really opens my eyes to the reality of nuclear power in the real world. The fact that this is just a game, it's so much simpler, only amplifies that fact. Nuclear power, responsible nuclear power, is not easy, simple, nor cheap. It takes drive and dedication to achieve, but looking at this whole setup and knowing how much it helps, I gotta say, it's worth it. Now, I can barely wait. I want to hear this turbine spinning so bad. And, good news, we have a ton of eutetic knack made. Now, it'll help us out if we do a little planning ahead, and we can think of a way to store all of the power we're going to be making. A fission reactor already kind of comes with a built-in storage power system in the machine. A steam turbine does not. And if we want to use it efficiently, we're going to need to make batteries to hold all of the power we're making so that 90% of it doesn't just go to waste before we can use it. So we spend day 30 making not 1, but 2 lithium batteries. In addition, we need to start looking into better flux ducts. The hardened flux ducts can carry 4,000 RF, pretty good, but that is just simply outclassed by the new huge amounts of power we're producing. We truly are on a new level with this thing. I set up the 2 batteries on each side of the turbine, and then I start to run fluid pipes to the turbine to carry over the steam. I'm pretty sure I did all these things right, but I guess one way or another, we're going to find out pretty soon. I then empty all of my finished knack out into the salt mixer so that I can add the melted redstone into it. I grab a ton, thinking that sure, this should be enough, but just like my love wasn't good enough to keep my dad from walking out on us, this is just not enough redstone to work in the reactor. It'll be a good start though, and unlike my twisted nightmare of a childhood, we'll always be able to get more. We do end up with 10 whole buckets worth of TBU salt fuel. I gotta say, actually putting this into the machine, it's all becoming so real now. This is actually gonna happen. Then I see that the redstone knack is coming along, but we really need to hurry this up. I just can't wait anymore. I throw in all of these upgrades to melt down the redstone faster, and soon we have a ton of melted redstone, but I make sure to continue and keep the knack production process going. By the end of the day, we have at least 10 buckets of redstone knack ready to be loaded into the MSR. So we do just that. And as I'm doing it, I realize, technically, this is set up. It's ready. Like, this is really ready. Now, I'm being slow and cautious, and I'm teasing you a little bit, I admit, but I'm being very careful and making sure I have extra coolant, because the last thing I want is for 130 days worth of work to just melt down. And knowing me, that's probably exactly what's going to happen. But I check everything, and sure enough, it all looks like it's ready to boot up. I take a little bit of time to check every little thing and make sure that we're actually ready to go. We have some more knack coming, but it'll still be a while. Honestly, I just can't wait anymore. I need to know if it'll work. I mean, if it'll even turn on, or if I've messed something up. I set up the salt mixer to make more knack and set the redstone off to the side. I'm super nervous right now. I mean, I'm pretty sure I did everything right, but I still want to cross every T and dot every I. Is that even an expression anybody uses anymore? Anyway, I end up with a total of 3 batteries. But really, I don't need to have these 2 batteries on the fission reactor, so I take these ones and move them over as well. 5 of the 6 ports on the turbine will have batteries, with the last one being where we take power directly into the lab to use right away. I think this is really going to happen. I finally throw this lever on the molten salt reactor and see that it's actually working. It's working perfectly. That pink fluid moving through the pipes means it's hot eutectic knack flowing into the heat exchanger where it's going to start to make steam. I turn the first heat exchanger on and, well, good news is there is high pressure steam building up here in this vent, but the bad news is it isn't moving into the second heat exchanger. For all the super complicated work I've been doing, somehow I forgot the super simple part of putting a servo on the pipes to make the steam move in the right direction. And on top of all this, we are in fact slowly overheating the MSR. I have no idea how quickly this will start to heat up, so sorry guys, that's a no for me, Chief. I do add a servo to one of the pipes on the first heat exchanger. Right away, the steam starts to enter the second heat exchanger. I mean, what? Do you just expect me to wait around till we have more knack? I'm turning this thing on. I add another servo onto the second exchanger, and the steam comes flooding through the pipes. I see the RPMs of the turbine. Do you hear the hum? Oh, that deep humming sound. Ah, that's music to my ears. The RPMs continue to climb, and the molten salt reactor is actually working. It's even starting to produce RF. It's going to the batteries and, wait. Oh, no. Well, that was anticlimactic. We have to run back into the mines so that I don't absolutely lose my mind. I'm not going to pretend like I'm happy to see that thing turn off. And while we're down here, we grab the fastest redstone that I've ever gotten, and I start to make a ton more servos. I run this over to the first heat exchanger because it actually has 3 ports where the steam comes out. We only got 1 servo on the first one. Then this is where I peek in and see that our heat exchanger has actually been storing up a ton of steam, and it starts to flow into the second heat exchanger right away. This means, even without turning on the MSR again, we'll have enough steam to give this turbine a second shot. And finally, on day 32, after 132 days of surviving radiation, nuclear bombs, earthquakes, meltdowns, all of that pain and all of that worry has been drowned out by the sweet, sweet turbine hum. The RPMs start to climb, and after 30 seconds of consistently running, they get up to speed. We need to run the turbine for 30 seconds before it starts to really make any power. This is why we need to make sure we have a constant supply of steam. Soon, we get up to speed, and the alternator starts to pump out a ton of power. I see that the batteries are quickly starting to charge. All this power, all of this steam, and the molten salt reactor isn't even activated. We only needed to burn a little bit of thorium for a few seconds, and it's already made enough hot eutectic knack to power this turbine for days. Now, the true power of the double heat exchanger comes to light. A few buckets of TBU equals billions of RF. And we get another little perk. I see that this tank is filling with cooled eutectic knack. It was used up when it was cooled down to make the steam. However, we can easily reuse it. That's right, we don't need to keep on producing this super expensive coolant. We can recycle it. Is it obvious I'm pretty excited about this thing? Now, those batteries are great, but I really don't want to run them back and forth. So we need to get a direct connection to our lab. We can make signalum flux ducts and run 9,000 RF per tick, Q over 9,000 meme. And all we need for these flux ducts is a little more melted redstone in our fluid transponder. That's expensive for sure, and it takes a ton of redstone, but again, very worth it. And what's good to see is that this entire time, the turbine has still been running, and even without the MSR on, the turbine will keep making power. So I decided to run it again, and this time we run the fission reactor as well. And with both of these running at once, we have so much power. As I'm continuing to make new signalum ducts, I hear the hum of the turbine restart, and I know that the system is working just as I had hoped. I start to connect the new flux ducts, and I gotta say, they look pretty sick. However, this is going to take a lot more signal. I need to head back to the lab. Now I'm aware that the power will bottleneck as soon as it gets to the hardened flux ducts, but I'll replace those with signalum soon enough. I just want to get this all set up so that the battery power will be running into the lab. We won't be needing to run the turbine for a little while anyways, with 5 full batteries. Now I'm swimming in RF. And the first thing I do is make sure I'm getting even more knack made so I can continue to live this molten salt dream. However, that'll probably take a little bit of time. I can do something though to help out with the knack problem right now. Remember this knack? We can recycle the knack that we've already... Knack. I keep on saying it. It's a really weird word, right? Knack. Anyway, I can run a fluid pipe from the knack output tube to the knack input tube back on the MSR. And now, once the knack comes out of the heat exchanger, it'll go right back into the MSR and start to cool it all over again. Knack. Okay, that means we should be able to turn this on again. I want to see if maybe this continuous cycle will be enough to keep the MSR cool after all. I'm going to push the limits just slightly of the MSR to see how strong this whole new setup is. Sure enough, as soon as the knack leaves the heat exchanger, it cools and goes right back into the molten salt reactor. Sadly, the knack takes more time cooling in the heat exchanger than it takes being heated up in the MSR, so the cycle isn't perfect. And after a little bit of time passes, the reactor does slowly begin to overheat again. No worries, we just need to add more nyak so we can get a more stable reactor. Nyak. But whether it's redstone nyak or signalum ducts, we need a ton more redstone. Such is the life of a successful nuclear engineer. On day 36, we get back into the bunker and we begin melting all of our redstone. Now, we can move on to the next step. True progress past the MSR. We're going to start to get use out of all of this power. And I start making a mining core sample drill. For my loyal boys and girls who already saw my Mars video, you know exactly what's coming next. But for anybody who didn't, this is going to let us see what chunks have deep ore deposits in our world. I checked the block in the center of our reactor and, wow, a uranium chunk. That couldn't be more fitting if I scripted it. And while that's cool, I still want to check around to see if we have anything else. Most chunks are no minerals, like this one, so it does take a while to test out all of the different chunks. So after checking all the blocks inside of my bunker, I find some cool blocks like copper, but I want to keep looking. So I figure this old mine shaft must be here for a reason, right? I start to head down it and checking each chunk along the way. I see iron, which is pretty good, because I do need iron to finish the bunker. But again, let's just keep looking. I continue down the mine shaft until we find it. The almighty coal vein. Yes, please. Now, you're probably thinking that coal is the last thing we need since we've advanced to the nuclear age, but the coal vein has 2 big perks. 2 words, diamonds and emerald. Oh wait, does that count as 3 words? Does the word and count? The point is, this mineral deposit has diamonds and emeralds, boys. Now it's time for our next mega immersive engineering machine. This machine is just as steel hungry as the steam turbine. But we actually maybe are kind of smart now because we have enough steel to not only repair our drill, but also to build all of the steel parts that we need. The excavator takes over 200 plus steel. Ooh, she's a thick one to be sure. So the fact that we can make this is really saying something. And without any extra work, we managed to get everything we need to get this machine down, even if it completely empties out all of our resources. But hey, as soon as we get this thing up and running, we won't have to worry about running out of coal, that's for sure. I always start by putting the wheel part down first, since it has to be like weirdly placed 2 blocks lower than the rest of the body of the excavator. I then make sure that I make a mistake and put the wrong blocks in the wrong spots. And this is really important, because it reminds me, I'm not actually as smart as I thought I was. It keeps me humble, and in a permanent state of depression, where I belong. No, I'm just kidding, guys. I don't feel depressed. I don't feel anything anymore. Not since that awesome pandemic made me lose my job, and now I'm stuck being a Minecraft YouTuber. Oh, hey, speaking of Minecraft, this massive mining machine is almost finished. The wheel is probably the most expensive part, at least steel-wise, but the main body does need to be set up correctly too. Not too hard. It's just that the 2 sides are not symmetrical, which is a little bit annoying, but soon we have everything ready to go. Looking good. And now we just spank it right in its booty hole, and diggy diggy hole indeed. And I'm so happy, I run right up and kiss it right in the hole. And normally, I would make this thing take me out to dinner first, but I love this thing so much, I don't care. Now, with really shallow innuendos aside, it's time to make a clean path to this machine. It's actually only maybe like 100 blocks away from my bunker, but with all these potholes and vines, it really slows me down, and I'm going to be running over here a lot. So now, I start to rebuild the mine shaft from the excavator all the way to my front door. I even rebuild the railroad and add a chest minecart to help me get a ton of coal, diamond, and emerald all the way back without making multiple trips. The only downside is I wasn't lying when I said I used up all of my resources to make this thing. I need a ton of redstone, like always, so it's back down to the mines to grab some. When we finally do get home, we use said redstone to make a ton of flux ducts. Now the excavator does take 4096 RF per tick, which is like the worst case scenario. The hardened flux ducts can only move 4000 RF, which means that there's just too short. But Signalum is way too expensive to run all the way down the mine shaft. So this is going to have to do for now. I finally set up all my flux ducts all the way down to the excavator. I plug them in, and then I start to run them all down the length of the mine shaft. I'll admit, this is a little bit impractical, and I could probably run some high voltage cables down here, but I just like this more. Then, when we get back to the bunker, we do have some light electrician work to do. See, if we were just to plug this in at the closest cord, the one that runs through the lab, the 4000 RF would all be sucked by the other machines. Drained. I already have enough innuendos. The excavator would never get its full power. So, we're going to be running a completely separate cord directly through the walls and under the hulls right down to the steam turbine itself. This way, 100% of the 4000 RF should go straight to the excavator. Pretty proud of this whole setup. However, that pride is quickly dashed, because as soon as I get back to the excavator itself, I see two things that ruin my good mood. One, the excavator is definitely not working at full power, and two, this little thing turned on without me, and it's now shooting ores everywhere. I craft a chest from the old mineshaft wood. We place it down and problem one is solved. Now we turn off the excavator until we find a way to get it fully powered. I head down to run the turbine again. Those batteries are looking pretty good. We turn on the MSR and we run it for as long as we can safely do so. Now we should have full power moving through those flux ducts. And yet, even with the RTG, we should be getting 4100 RF, and it's still struggling. And yes, while I could try to use my brain to find a solution to this problem, I decide I could just throw an RTG at instead. So of course, on day 40, we set up 3 RTGs on the excavator, but even though, by my math, this should come out to over 4300 RF, this thing is still not quite working right. And I will say, as frustrating as this is, it's still pretty cool to see our diamonds and emeralds come pumping out. Even at this super low power, this is enough motivation to really keep me working. So, as I had so subtly foreshadowed, we head back down to the turbine and grab one of the fully charged batteries. We then slap it directly onto one of the plugs of the excavator, and then we set up the battery to output power directly into the excavator, and bingo. We now have a fully charged excavator on a diamond and emerald mine. Now with this direct power cord and 3 RTGs, this battery shouldn't drain too fast. But as I'm just about to leave, it's already starting to tick away, so I quickly see that this is more like wearing a diaper and going to Taco Bell. A more permanent solution is definitely going to be needed. For now, I'm making a pulverizer to help get even more diamonds. I'm having a little bit of a difficulty finding some room for it in the lab, so I guess it's time to add an excavator processing room. I drill a hole in my storage room wall. Man, would it be cool to do this in real life? I'm going to make this room right here one of the biggest in the bunker. We're going to be connecting this room to a power strip that goes directly to the turbine. We run them all the way up over the living area in the ceilings and run out of redstone again. So we head back into the mines looking for redstone only like a few days after we did this before. However, to be fair, we are making a ton of flux ducts, so that's not too crazy. But soon, we have dedicated power running into our new room. I head to the excavator, and I see that it's still running at full steam for the past 3 days. And it has tons of diamonds, emeralds, and wow, stacks of coal. However, with this current setup, the batteries will need to be replaced soon, which is not super fun. But what is fun is setting up our hopper system on our new pulverizer. We connect that to the power grid, and I even start to run more power throughout the entire room, because I know that this room will eventually look like the lab, as it's going to be holding a ton of machines. But for now, check this out. 1 diamond ore equals 2 diamonds. That means for every coal, diamond, and emerald ore our excavator makes, we double these ores, just like how our manufacturer would double normal ores. This is all, of course, assuming we can keep this excavator running. We take these dead batteries and run all of these ores back to the pulverizer. We put the batteries down here to be charged. So to charge them, we will need more power. Are you guys starting to see how everything in this bunker is just slightly bottlenecked by the lack of eutectic knack? The MSR can't run all the time without overheating, so we can't have full power all the time, and the excavator will die out. So I need to work on getting more eutectic knack fast. But in the meantime, I decide I might as well use all of these emeralds I'm making and help out with that problem. And no, emeralds won't give us direct power. We can't just burn up money. We're not the US government after all. Instead, we can make more emerald coolers for the fission reactor. These are some pretty powerful coolers, and we now have enough emeralds coming where we can make a ton of them. So we head to the top and open up the reactor. I decide to even go a level deeper. Just like we did at the bottom of the reactor, we add graphite blocks in the corner with our reactor cell in the dead center. We then set up the emerald coolers all around the sides. Then after we do this, we can add back in the lapis layer again to top it all off. Then we can go back to doing an emerald layer to really up the cooling per cell effect. But emeralds are still emeralds, and until we get more coming along, we don't have enough to go any further. And I need to sub in some more of the lapis coolers. Next, we add that same cap of redstone, gold, and water to the end of the reactor to really up the cooling factor of the entire thing. We seal everything up, and when we head down to the reactor, I see that we have 19 cells with minus 7,000 cooling. This means that the MLX fuel can make 8K power stably with no meltdown danger. We could literally turn this on and it would never overheat. And with all this extra power, it's really helping us make even more fuel for the MSR, which is honestly kind of overkill at this point. It's just so efficient with its TBU usage. We turn this on so we can charge our batteries. But after a day of running, the MSR is still in danger of overheating eventually. But maybe more importantly, we've been running the turbine and getting so much power, we really need to start thinking about how we're going to get some use out of all this power. And that first starts with using our Signalum flux ducts in the lab. This will really clear up a big bottleneck for us. It means that the lab going from sharing a 4,000 RF tube to a 9,000 RF supply, more than doubling the power of the machines. Yes, 9,000, bigger than 4,000. Why am I explaining simple math to you? So now I'm making a ton of Signalum ducts, because to be honest, to truly use the MSR, you need to have the power infrastructure to move all of this power around. I'm running the Signalum all the way down the right side of the lab to the salt mixers themselves, which will help us make more knack, which will let us run the MSR longer, which makes more power. You guys see what I'm doing. Speaking of running longer, I decide to move all of the batteries to the excavator, so I'll be able to keep this running much, much longer. I then decide I want to kick this up to the next level. I'm trying to find a redstone mineral deposit, if I'm being totally honest, but I find a lapis one, and I just can't pass this up. Lapis veins make, well, lapis, duh, but they also make tons of iron. If I get an excavator on this deposit, we can combine all of that coal from the first excavator and all of this iron to make more steel than Rockefeller, or Carnegie. I forget which one was the big steel guy. Well, now I really wish I did know who he was. I'd call him up and ask him for some steel right now, because we don't have enough, so we're gonna have to go iron mining for day 47. That's right. We need to get more iron so that we can make a machine to get more iron. You might even say that's ironic. Oh, ooh. Okay, that was it. That right there was the peak of my YouTube career. All right, we get the steel wheel in place, and soon we can start to set up the surrounding body. You guys already know the deal. I mean, we literally just did this like 10 minutes ago, so I'll hurry right through this part. Sadly, because we don't have a redstone deposit, we don't have enough to finish this line of flux ducts, so we are going to have to go back to the mines really quickly. Of course, I would still really like to get a redstone deposit. Truth be told, the whole idea behind the excavators is if they're bringing in all of the outside resources, then I'll never have to leave the bunker for anything. That's the whole point of a survival bunker, right? Lock yourself in, don't go outside, live the life of a League of Legends player. Anyway, on day 49, we do get enough redstone to make the flux ducts, and we connect the second excavator, and I gotta say, 2 excavators in just 15 days. It's not too bad. Of course, it really doesn't mean that much if they're always running out of power. So I run this power cord through the processing room where I have that direct connection to the MSR. So to really utilize this, I'm gonna have to start melting down more redstone. And I'm even more set on getting this goal accomplished when I see that all 5 batteries are already dead today. I set them down by the turbine to charge again, but they're not the problem. Clearly, the knack is. I thought that because of the recycling knack, I wouldn't really need to get too much, but it's clear that the more knack you have, the better, and we probably should get some in excess. So I make another salt mixer purely to mix the finished knack with all the melted redstone. Then I fill that mixer with all the knack, and I get as much redstone melting as I possibly can. But remember, this is hooked up to the Signalum ducts, so we can bring in a ton of power. So we throw 23 speed upgrades to really push this thing. Finally, we turn on the fission reactor and the MSR to power the process, and soon we have buckets of redstone knack. Adding this to the MSR should directly increase the power consistency of the base and make running all of these mega machines. We then add some speed upgrades to the redstone melter, because this is kind of the whole thing holding us back at this point. We get buckets and buckets more of knack. And I gotta admit, at this point I'm kind of getting a little carried away here, because I start to throw blocks of redstone into the melter. But I do have a good reason for this. We're going to need it anyway for as much Signalum as possible, right? On day 52, we have a full jerry can, 10 buckets of Eutectic knack. Now the MSR should be good to run for a while. And we still have enough melted redstone over to make a bunch of the Signalum, which we start to run all over the base, including running it all the way down to our excavator. I run our first Signalum power line to the Lapis excavator to just test out to see how well this works. And I'm pretty sure it will work. If this thing doesn't power the excavator nonstop, I give up. I don't know what will. Soon, the whole thing is connected, and just like I was hoping, the excavator is running nonstop at full power. This is the true endgame ideal immersive engineering setup, and man, it feels good. Lapis and iron are pouring in. Not to mention, look at all that coal. If we're going to store all this, I think we might need an extra chest. Maybe 2. Maybe 3. So with all of this going so well, what else could an engineer ask for? Well, while profits and efficiency are great, a truly responsible engineer always considers the repercussions of his or her actions. So our new goal will be figuring out how to deal with the waste coming out of our MSR. I do spend a little bit of today trying for that dream, hoping to get a redstone deposit, but after being out here all day, all I find is a coal vein. Never thought I'd be disappointed to find diamonds. And because I can't find that deposit, I have to spend an entire day finding redstone the old-fashioned way. If you consider using a drill the old-fashioned way. And we are in fact mining for a whole 2 days. But at the start of day 56, I'm glad to see that our excavators are working perfectly this whole time. I'm running all of the resources over to the processing room, but even with the minecarts, this is a lot. However, before I start to work on a system to move more ores to the processing room, I should really work on a system to process our nuclear waste. Even after running it for almost 30 days, the MSR has only made about 4 buckets of waste. Still, this must be dealt with. So, we run this fluid pipe all the way over to this centrifuge. This will move the nuclear waste without us needing to touch it by hand, and it will begin to process it. Unlike the fission reactor, which only needed 1 machine to reprocess its fuel, we're going to have to make a little system here. Everything about the MSR is more complicated, but also very, very worth it. So we're going to have to add an electrolyzer as well, and connect it to the centrifuge. The centrifuge will remove the salt mixture and pull out the depleted TBU, which will go into the electrolyzer. From there, we can add an ingot or ingot, however you pronounce it, a former, and connect that to the electrolyzer. The electrolyzer will remove the fluorine so that we'll only have the depleted molten TBU left, which will be turned into a pellet of deleted TBU once it goes into the former. Underneath these machines, we can add storage tanks to hold the very, very important materials that are removed from the depleted TBU, like the flied salt mixture, which we can recycle. We can take out the final depleted TBU pellet and throw that into the fuel reprocessor just like we would with fission fuels, and all of our waste is now being recycled. Because we can use the reprocessed materials in fission fuels and get even more RF out of the old MSR waste. We can even store up all the fluorine to reuse it to make more TBU MSR fuel. With this setup, all we have to do is keep bringing in fresh thorium. We can keep making MSR fuel with the recycled salt mixture and fluorine with nothing going to waste. A truly thoughtful and responsible engineer must do this. Our reward for being so considerate to our environment is all the lapis. I mean, look at this. What am I even gonna do with all this? With everything going so well, it's not all good. Our second heat exchanger seems to be slowing down and struggling for some reason, and I'm not really sure why. So I spend about a day trying to empty all the tanks and reset everything, trying to figure out what the problem is. And soon, I see that the problem is that we're making too much high-pressure steam. Yeah, you heard me correctly. We're being too efficient. With all this reset, the turbine is quickly back online, and the lapis blocks are quickly piling up. Now that I'm satisfied with the waste recycling system, it's time to upgrade our excavators. This starts by removing all the hardened flux ducts and replacing them with signal flux ducts. Now you see why I was spending 2 whole days mining redstone. This is super expensive and resource heavy. But then again, what part of my bunker isn't at this point? After a bit of reworking the bunker power grid, we now have a direct 9,000 RF power line going from our steam turbine to the coal vein excavator. This means we're going to have a ton more raw resources pouring in. This means we're going to need to process all of those extra resources. Enter the arc furnace. Another endgame, massive multi-block machine from Immersive Engineering. This thing has a huge range of uses, but first and foremost, its big thing, it is a steel-making powerhouse. And of course, big machine need big space. So our processing room is expanding to more of a factory floor. This machine isn't as complicated as the other ones, but it still takes a few steel blocks and some reinforced blast furnace bricks. We drill down until we have the processing room connected to the lab. And yes, I'll admit, this was a little bit of a mistake, but now that I see it, I actually kind of like it. After all, the more mobility I have in my base, the better. We then start to set up the back wall of engine blocks and scaffolding, and then we can begin to fill in the middle with the reinforced bricks. This big boy right here was the whole reason that we made the processing room in the first place. And I gotta admit, once it's set down, it looks pretty amazing. Now we can start to mass smelt and work down all of the raw resources coming from our 2 excavators working at full speed. The next 40 days will see us getting very, very rich. So I decide not to mess around and I go straight to signal and flux ducts in the back of the arc. And soon we have this thing fully powered. But there is one big problem. In order to run an arc furnace, you need 3 graphite rods. There's a blueprint that lets you make graphite rods, but it's only sold at an engineer's workshop by a villager. Are you starting to see the problem right here? I'm the last engineer alive in the city, so even with all the diamonds, the steel, the emeralds, we simply cannot buy this blueprint. But maybe I can MacGyver my way around this problem. Does anybody get that reference? You guys know who MacGyver is? He was this ridiculous 80s show character. He did things like repaired a car using egg whites. It was really stupid. The point is, I can try to make a workaround. I use a blueprint on my workbench to make a steel press for rods. Now all I have to do is make a machine called a metal press. Compared to the beastly machines that I've been making all day, this little guy right here is a breeze. It only takes conveyor belts, which I have to admit are pretty cool all by themselves. They automatically move items around your base, kind of like how pipes do. They're pretty sick looking, and if you have enough leather, you can make a whole network of them. And I would, but sadly, we only have enough to just barely make this metal press. But we do. We then throw this metal press mold for a rod into the metal press. And now here comes the hard part. Unfortunately, we can't just use the graphite that we got from Nuclearcraft. We need to use the Immersive Engineering graphite. Okay, no problem, right? Wrong. Big problem. To make the graphite, we have to start by making coke coal. You know, that thing that takes forever? Even with all this 320 iron, this doesn't make me feel any better. Okay, it makes me feel a little bit better. Looking at all this iron, I forget why we were so mad in the first place. Oh right, a whole day has passed, and we aren't any closer to getting any of our coke coal. Now I remember. So, at the end of the day, finally, we get a block of coke coal. So we're good, right? Right? Wrong again. The next step is getting coke dust, which can only be made in a crusher. Can I get an oof in chat for that one? It's another multi-block machine, and this one is much less exciting. The good news is, it's also much, much less expensive. A bit of steel, but mostly just some iron to make all of the hoppers. So on day 64, we find a little area just outside of the bunker, and inside of this obsidian chamber, we get started. We open it up a little bit more, and we start to set down all of the components for the crusher. Now, in a mod pack without Nuclearcraft, the crusher is actually pretty good. It works a lot like a manufactory or a pulverizer, but it's more expensive than both, and it takes up a lot of space. Not to mention, it can be a bit dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, and I'm really good at not knowing what I'm doing. But we are going to need it if we want the graphite. There's just no other way. And again, it's not too expensive or hard to make, so I won't complain. Even though I did just spend all of day 64 complaining. We get this built, and we start to run power back through the bunker wall. We then throw the 9 pieces of coke coal that we have so far into the jaws of this big boy. And this is where it can be a bit dangerous. Guess what happens if you fall into the top part of the crusher? Well, you're going to have to keep on guessing because I'm not going to show you. What I will show you is the struggle to get this coke dust. We put 9 in the manufactory, so this should get us enough. Right? Please say right this time. Well, it turns out it takes 8 coke dust to make just 1 graphite dust. So this is going to take forever. I throw some more coke coal into the crusher and seriously contemplate jumping in myself. So, all of my loyal viewers, what do we do when we're looking for a reason not to just end it all? Well, we start building in Minecraft, of course, but you guys already know that. So we make a staircase that goes up a level above the bunker, and I start to open up this huge area. This is where we will begin our final endgame project, and the reason we might do 300 days in this bunker. But for now, I played 100 days of Harvestcraft, but I never even grew a single tree, so it seems only fitting to give it a try and grow a few now. And with an excavator that just pumps out emeralds, we can buy as many as we want. So I start with a plum tree, gross, but I promise it gets better, like this cherry tree. Alright. But I do feel like if the radiation doesn't stop these things from growing, the cramped little space might. So we spend a day expanding this orchard. And yes, I mean an entire day, because it turns out most of this area is covered in obsidian, and no, I'm not very happy about it. But finally, we get enough room to put down a chestnut tree, and then we get a date to start us off, even though I'm still very single. Day 67, and while our coke coal is still slowly coming along, we don't want to just sit around and waste any time. Instead, we continue to work on the main reason we built this bunker. And now we can bring in a bunch of seeds of all different varieties so that we can reestablish the ecosystem in this nuclear wasteland. For now, let's check in on our coke dust production. Oh good, it's horrible, just like I predicted. We run that dust into the manufactory, and we try not to scream about how long this is all taking. Finally, we get enough graphite to use our metal press and make our first graphite rod. That's right, 1 graphite rod. We need 3. And because this is the knockoff brand way of making graphite rods, it's only at half health. This is going to take so long. And now, knowing that the end of the 200 days is coming, I'm getting a little desperate here. And I try to hurry up the process by crafting 2 advanced coke ovens, and I fill them with coal. This has been so upsetting and so distracting that I don't even have anything fun to do on day 69. Sure, I know it's technically 169, but still, it's day 69. Why coke coal? Why do you hate me so? I'm starting to come to a realization. Using coke coal to make a little extra steel when we have a ton of clean nuclear energy at our fingertips, it might have been a little bit of a greedy play, and we might be getting punished for that. Somewhere, hidden down in here, there's a message about greed at the expense of the environment, but I'm too emotionally broken to learn it. Finally, by day 70, we get our third graphite rod in place. And now we can get our steel we worked so hard for. And well, it turns out I'm not done learning that lesson the hard way. I didn't know this, but the arc furnace cannot make steel using regular coal and iron. But in fact, it needs to use coke coal to make steel. So now, that stuff that took us days to make is the only way to use this entire setup. So after this realization, I gotta admit, I'm a little bit fed up with the immersive engineering. I start to turn to thermal expansion. I use an augmented redstone furnace to make coke coal a little bit faster, and I have it drop right into the crusher. And after making all of these machines and wasting all this time, I'm still trying to see if I can salvage this by making 2 more redstone furnaces. We need to craft up 2 pyrolithic conversion augments for each furnace. We then carefully move around the lip of the crusher, trying not to fall in, and then we place the 2 furnaces directly over the crusher. We add the upgrades and the augments, and now we can fill this with coal and get coke coal a lot faster, which is still, in retrospect, pretty slow. So now we have our arc furnace steel production. But at what cost? Everything, little one. Everything. So now, this system is kind of making some coke coal, but I'm not really entertaining this method anymore. One of the big parts about being an engineer is admitting when your hypothesis is incorrect. The arc furnace had a lot of promise, but the nuclear route seems to just have the edge here. On top of the fact that we can use nuclear energy to power this alloy furnace with no dirty coal usage, it's also undeniably a lot easier to set up. And as sad as this all is, at least I still have all this lapis to comfort me. Oh, and speaking of tons of resources that make me feel better, check this out. Nuclear power, once again, reminds me why it's king, as we can see stacks and stacks of goodies. While I've been wasting time with this dirty coke coal, my nuclear-powered excavators are literally overflowing with some of the best ores in Minecraft. We start to run our alloy furnace and fill it with all of the resources we have pouring in from our excavators. The arc furnace is still struggling, while the alloy furnace has enough MSR power to run 32 speed upgrades. So the steel production comparison is, well, there really is no comparison. Nuclearcraft wins on this one. But the one thing that loses every time is greed. Because as soon as I push things a little bit farther and overload this furnace with 40 speed upgrades, the turbine immediately turns off, as if to remind me that this is just a little too much. We run into the reactor room to get both these bad boys up and running. We even get some plutonium fuels running in the fission reactor, and soon we have all the power we're going to need. I head back to the alloy furnace in the processing room, and I set the system up so that there's a hopper that loads in all the coal and a separate hopper that loads in all the iron. With all the upgrades and power, we quickly have over 700 steel. Wow, in just a few days. Oh, wow. No need for greed here. I really couldn't ask for any more than this. And speaking of greed, we're being pretty wasteful by letting the excavators just overflow like this. So it's time to fix this and stop us from needing to run down and unload these thick boys by hand. To do that, we're going to run item ducts all the way down the mine shaft and hook them up. We then throw on our servo here, and very soon we start to see that not only will we be getting a mountain of diamonds, emeralds, and coal, but now it will all be automatically flowing straight back into our bunker. Gotta say, this is a beautiful sight to behold. Okay, I'm kind of just obsessed here, watching the diamonds flow all the way back to the pulverizer setup. Obviously, after seeing that, of course we're going to run an item duct to the second excavator. Then we lead it all the way back to, And where should we drop this off? I guess that floating chest will do for now. Quick fix. Day 75 is back to mining for a bit, because we ran out of all things, lead. Yeah, lead. The material I had never even think about. Well, we need 4 of them if we want to make a manufactory. So after we get a man, we get pulverized. Shh, don't make it weird. And soon, we can set up the double system that produces the lapis and the pulverizer with the manufactory that will double the iron. Finally, we can get back to our true calling, which is working in the orchard. And it looks like we're going to need some work here, because even when I'm bone milling, there just isn't enough room in here to let these things grow. We need to drill up and really start to open up this chamber. My final hope is that it'll actually be about as big as the cave where we put our original farm, maybe even bigger. Sure enough, our first trees are starting to pop up. And look at that. It's a cherry tree. Fitting. We keep expanding the orchard room, keep drilling through all the obsidian. Fun. And finally, by day 77, the orchard is, well, actually an orchard, because the trees are starting to come up proper. And after seeing how good this all looks, I'm starting to feel that bug again. That's right, we got the builder's bug. I start setting out a ton of new marble designs in these square blocks here. This pattern has kind of a modern Art Deco look, and I really like it. It's clean looking, which fits the bunker vibe, without looking straight up sterilized like an experimental lab, which, if this is supposed to be a Fallout vault, I guess it kind of should. Once the hallways are all set, I go into the processing room. This room will have a bunch of steel slices. I wonder if we'll ever run out of steel. This is the usual way I decorate the lab and the processing room. This looks more industrial, whereas the living areas have at least an attempt to look a little bit nicer. But I have to take a little break from doing all this, because I've learned from my mistakes on the early days of this playthrough that I should really make sure I have enough mushrooms and glowstone dust so that we have Radaway for 300 days if the crew demands it. Now, while I love the marble floors, I'm thinking it's time to go really fancy. The orchard is the highlight of this 200 days build. It's the entire idea behind this bunker. Oh, other than the processing room, I suppose. But the orchard is meant to be beautiful. It's a reminder of what this world was like before the bombs fell, and what it could be if we work hard enough to clean up the wasteland. We start removing all the stone out of the floor, and we replace it with gold-plated gilded lapis blocks. Those will be the pathways. As for the ground surrounding the paths, we're going to have this deep, dark, glittering space blue lapis. Next, I think we should do a little better than just having some polished stone around all of our trees, considering how precious they really are. So we start to chisel some marble and make proper borders around each and every tree. I didn't even realize this, but now that I'm looking back and watching this footage, we have this ocean blue, gold, and white that kind of matches the captain's colors, and obviously the best color palette. What's also looking pretty good is that the lapis floor in the orchard doubles as a ceiling for our processing room down below it. Everything is starting to take shape. It's looking very clean, and this might quickly become one of the best builds I've ever lived in Minecraft. I continue to work on all the details, adding in more decorative blocks as I go. This includes adding a proper walkway up to the scenic orchard reservation. By the way, do you guys like this kind of stuff? Do you guys like watching me build and make these modern designs, or do you guys just prefer when I build all these tech mod kind of things, sort of mini tutorials on how to use all these machines? I love doing them both, so I'd love to hear what you guys say. Because I gotta say, as I'm walking through this bunker, it's very clear this is not only highly functional, but becoming truly beautiful. We continue to use the arc furnace, and I continue to hate it, but hey, I gotta admit, I have a couple good setups here with some good machines all around the processing room, so I'm happy. I then see that some of the nuclear blocks have safely decayed down to lead, and that the nuclear waste is safely being used up on its own. I also decide that after almost 200 days of hard work, it's time to put some real respect on the fission reactor, and I upgrade it with proper signalum flux ducts. And on top of that, I decide that this thing is strong enough to handle some highly enriched uranium fuels, and okay, that one might have been a little bit of a stretch. This fuel is still just a little bit too spicy, but it's good to see that the thorium-230, which is the main byproduct of the molten salt fuels, has started to decay down into lead blocks, which are not only safe, but, free lead. Speaking of lead, this reminds me that we should have a protective shield over our trees to keep out any harmful radiation. Now, I know I don't have enough lead to do this, but steel? Oh, we have steel. So I craft up a ton of steel blocks, including sheet metal and scaffolding. At the start of day 83, I head up to the orchard, and I begin to build our protective steel shield. And no, I'm not just going to throw up a wall of sheet metal. I'm more creative than that. Sometimes. I start to use the scaffolding to reinforce the walls and hold this big chamber open. Although it is Minecraft, you don't have to build supports for anything. I mean, you can literally have floating blocks in the sky. This is purely for looks, but it does look pretty good. And I have to say, this room really does speak to me. It has beautiful trees, yet they're tainted, burnt red with radiation. It has decorative floors that are contrast against the robust steel walls. It really reflects the entire playthrough of this bunker itself. It's functional, yet limited by form, and it's decorative, yet it's realistic. On day 84, I start to put more steel slices on the roof, but as I see this, I decide that there's just too much steel going on. Instead, I head back down and I start crafting up a bunch of iron sheet metal. I get up to the roof, which is much easier with the walls being covered in scaffolding and having a room full of trees that I can walk on. But it's not going to be that easy. It's going to take a lot of work to carefully place all the slices. But then again, this entire base took a lot of work, and it's all been worth it this far. I continue to work my way around the front wall, placing steel and setting up all of the steel scaffolding. It's a bit of a pain to set this all up, especially since it has no function, but when I take a step back and actually get a good look at it, it has this early centuries beauty to it. It kind of reminds me of like the Golden Gate Bridge or steel scaffolding skyscrapers of old New York. What did I just say? Old New York? Does that make sense? Maybe all that lead is really getting to me. Well, I know one thing that's really getting to me, and it's this last tree. This thing will not grow. I even tried to change it out with a different type of tree, but it's no good. I keep bone mealing, but even after drilling more space all the way through the obsidian, this thing just won't grow. But again, I know I shouldn't be too greedy. I've learned to be happy with what I have, especially when I have so much. Instead, I set this avocado tree sapling in the main entrance, and if it grows, it grows. But if not, I'm not going to push it anymore. I put all my steel back in place and start to work on the far side wall, setting down sheet metal in the orchard that is now 15 blocks tall. But I do need to take a little bit of a break here because I've run out of steel. Oh no, where will I find more steel? Wow, look at this chest. Told you we were rich. I made a ton of engineer's hammers, so we could make a ton of steel plates, so we could make a ton of steel sheet metal. We take a little walk up the stairs, and I have to say, every time I enter into this room, I love it more and more. I'm really falling in love with this orchard. I start to add all of my steel sheet metal to the back wall now, and as I do so, I make sure to collect any marble that I find back here too. And you can probably already tell, I'm going to be using a lot more of this. It takes a whole day, and a few broken Ankies, but soon we have the entire far wall made of steel and covered in scaffolding to boot. Another day later, and we have the longest wall of the backside all covered in steel as well. We continue to add the roof too, but I know I'm going to have to leave some gaps up here because I still have one final project that's going to have to hang from the roof. And now we can start on the last wall, the inner wall that's over the processing room. I know that this entire room and its decorating is going to take a long time, and it's pretty much guaranteed to fill up my last days of this video, but it's the main reason I wanted to do 200 days. I wanted to get an area that wasn't just purely function. I've made a ton of playthroughs with all of our industrial Nuclearcraft labs, and that's a lot of fun and it's really amazing. But I wanted to show you guys what it all really means. What's the end game of all of this Nuclearcraft? By building up and powering all of our nuclear reactors, we've powered the machines that have made all of this possible. From all of the emeralds that we use to buy our trees, to the lapis that we're using on the floors, the steel and the iron that are actually making up the building itself. Every time I finish a section, I take a step back and I just look at it. I'm kind of doing two things at once right here. I'm really trying to make this bunker look great, but I'm also testing out to see how these blocks look, because someday we might need to use all of the steel to rebuild the city above us. I'm seeing how I like everything and trying to get a good look at what a bigger structure might look like. And I gotta say, from this sample, I'm pretty happy and I'm pretty excited. But for this playthrough, I only have 10 days left, and I decide to take a little break and get back to checking on all of my machines. Everything from the arc furnace to the pulverizers to the alloy furnace are still making materials faster than I can even use them now. And this entire time, the turbine has been spinning, producing power non-stop. I even find out something pretty cool. The fission reactor is so strong that if I drop one single pellet of highly enriched uranium fuel, it can tank the heat and keep it from melting down until the entire pellet is used up. This means, in theory, In-game... Nope, wrong channel. In theory, I could drop a pellet of highly enriched fuel and just walk away, and the fission reactor will have no risk of melting down. Speaking of blowing up and melting down, I think it's finally time to not only atone for my sins with all of these nuclear fuel usages and meltdowns from the first 100 days, but also it's time to try and heal the damage caused by those who attacked the city to begin with. This final machine setup that we're adding right now is to make borax. We just have to start off by melting down some boron. We get some hydrogen from our electrolyzer and we add it to the melted boron, and soon we get our first diboran. We just need another chemical reactor to combine that with water. With this, I start to set up our last complicated pipe machine system in this 100 days video, as I'm running water from the infinite water source to the last chemical reactor. This will make boronic acid, which will move into the chemical reactor that has the potassium fluoride solution. Remember this from the NAC making process? Does this count as a callback? Nah, I'm not even really sure anymore. Soon, we get our boronic acid and our potassium together, and we get our first borax. If you've watched my other videos, and you know what borax is for, you're probably already excited for what's coming next. Nonetheless, we head out for the very last time to get some beets and head out to the mines for boron and more marble. We get it in the manufactory, then into the melter, and soon we're getting enough borax to move to the final phase of this playthrough. We combined the elite panels that we got in the first 100 days with the borax we've created in these second 100 days. And now we have a bunch of radiation scrubbers. That's right, we're making a machine that will finally start to bring the radiation levels down, instead of the last 190 days where it's been increasing. We head up to our top priority, the orchard, and we start to set up these scrubbers so that they're hanging down in the middle of open space. Radiation scrubbers perform best when they have a big open area to operate in. Now, of course, this is the worst case scenario, being cramped up in a bunker like this, but this particular room is designed to be wide open and have a ton of space to scrub out the radioactive particles. Also, having 3 of them in the same room doesn't hurt either. With all of these set up, I take very careful note of my rad meter. I see we have about 13 millirads up here. Down inside the bunker, closest to the reactors, I see that we have 15 millirads. I spend a bit of time making a few more radiation scrubbers, trying to use all of the elite panel materials I have. I make a bit more borax, and soon I have about 3 more scrubbers. I decide that since the reactors are making the most radiation at this point, it only makes sense to put a scrubber right down here at the source. Then, I make a small little tower in my original farm area and set one down here as well. I still have 1 left over, but I can already see that the millirads in the orchard have gone from 13 to 12. For 3 radiation scrubbers, that doesn't really seem like very much. So with this last radiation scrubber, I might have to get a little creative. I set it down under the bunker. The rads start at 13, but as I clear out more and more space, they quickly fall to 12. And by the end of the day, they are now down to 10. Finally, just before I leave, I see that the millirads are actually down to single digits. This is fitting too, because this is the chunk that's directly underneath the turbine, the cleanest power source that we have. I start to move through my base, checking chunk to chunk, and I quickly see that every chunk that is a radiation scrubber, the rads have sharply fallen. And with this, I think it's finally time. I'm safe enough now. I take my tank full of corium from the original fission meltdown, and I start to drill deep under my bunker. I hit bedrock, and I set it down, and I start to throw a layer of steel over it. I don't think this really does much in-game, if I'm being totally honest. This is more of like a sentimental gesture. I'm burying my past. Come on, guys, it's Minecraft. I'm allowed to play it up a little bit here. So whether that worked or not, the rads are down to 8 in some areas, and I finally feel safe to eat some beets. This would have messed up my testing to see if the rads were going down, but I think it's safe enough to say that they do work. With a full belly of beets, I actually end up with only 4 millirads. And sure, my rads will slowly start to climb up again as the beets wear off. But as I continue to finish the bunker, I notice that it's not really going up too much. The radiation all over the bunker is more or less set in the single digits now. With the radiation slowing down, I now have the freedom to focus my last 5 days of this playthrough on what I really want to do. I've been living in this half-finished bunker for almost 200 days, and even with it being full of radiation, meltdowns, and everything else that's been going on, it might be the best base I've ever built. So with the last few days of this playthrough, I'm going to push it over the top and make this bunker the best Minecraft base I've ever done. It starts with expanding the walls out to the full size of the bunker and making a full covering shell of steel sheet metal. This will serve as a solid protection for what else ever happens down here. I also make sure to polish up the inside of the base with some polished marble. Okay, horrible pun, but hey, I'm at the end of 200 days here. I'm running out of juice. I start making a staircase and doorways so that the bunker feels more complete than just being dug into the side of a cave. I have to admit, most of the time in this playthrough, when I come back from mining, I kind of just feel like I show up in the middle of the base. Now I'm going to try to make a very clear border using walls and doors so that the inside where I live is not like a random cave outside, and it's clearly divided. One of the areas I like putting doors is wherever the bunker meets up with a sewer pathway or a mine shaft. Then I also want to keep the farm area open, and I add a second level balcony that wraps around the whole side of the wall. Finally, we get all the way to the far side of the farm. I've been really holding off and waiting to do something over here because of all of the obsidian I'd have to drill. I didn't want to have to attempt to make this area look clean until, well, I really had to. And speaking of hanging out here until the last minute, if you're still watching this video, you're probably either fallen asleep or you're a real fan of mine. After all, we're now a full 200 days in, so I feel like I can be honest with you guys and I can tell you some of the regrets that I've had in the last 2 videos. Don't get me wrong, this playthrough has been awesome and has shown me that 200 days can be a really fun video to make. But I would have made a few changes. The biggest regret I have, of course, is the meltdown that we had in day 75 of the first video. This really slowed us down a lot, and it actually kept us from getting the MSR running in the first 100 days. In this video, however, I kind of wish I had skipped making the arc furnace. And while it does look really cool, admittedly, it's just not as actually useful as the Nuclearcraft machine equivalents. If I didn't waste the 15 or so odd days that I did making that work, I probably could have spent more time right now trying to make this bunker finally look good. And while it is coming along, looking pretty solid, the last few days are now ticking by, and I'm seeing that there will be a few things that I'm probably not going to get done. Only 2 days left, and I start to head down to the reactor room. This is the real area that I wish I had more time in. I've known since day one that this would be a massively changing, ever-expanding area where I would be continuing to build my reactors. Because of this, I never really made it look clean by adding any walls or floors. As a result, it's by far the ugliest room in my bunker. I guess that does kind of make sense, because the sub-level reactor room or any basement would kind of look like booty in a real vault. But still, it makes me sad that this room, which was so amazing and is kind of in a lot of ways like the highlight of Nuclearcraft and the best part of this bunker, is just so ew. So, in a hurry, I try to add some true steel casing around it. And I must say, it looks much better than the caves that we started with. This ending is bittersweet in a way, because while we got so much done, and while I've gotten farther in this video than I ever have in Nuclearcraft or Immersive Engineering, we still have so much more to do. It really is one of the best builds I've ever made in Minecraft, but the funny thing about making a Minecraft base is even though you put so much time into it, you always want to play the best ones even more. It has now officially been a full 200 days in this oasis of life and science in a nuclear wasteland. If I never play this base again, I will be so happy with what we've done here. But honestly, I think it might be time to head to the surface. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments. And more importantly, help me out and keep my channel alive by clicking on the link in my description and trying out Rec Room. I'd love to see what you guys can build. And I'd really love to put your work in my next video, which might even be 300 days in a nuclear bunker.